So this is obligatory slide number one, which addresses some things that you may or may not learn today, dealing with like kind of audiences and communication and some things that we're going to try to hopefully impart some knowledge on. This would be obligatory slide number two, which is basically a kind of a more expanded version of the blurb that's in your schedules. Hi.
Hi.
How's everybody doing? Fantastic, fantastic. Welcome to DC, those of you that are not from here, and welcome to Who Matters. My name is Mark Chambers. I direct sustainability and energy for the district buildings, for all the portfolio of properties and public properties here in the city. So the 30 million square feet that is our schools, our rec centers and parks and fire stations, police stations. You know, so lately we've been kind of having this conversation a lot. The reality is, as we start to think about these large kind of holistic issues, you know, climate and carbon mitigation, other kind of systemic problems, we've come to the conclusion that we have to be much more intentional about how we reach out to different audiences and how we think about them and how we adjust our messages to make sure that we are actually being more inclusive. You know, like many of you here, you know, I've been part of this green building movement for a very long time, you know, working on green building policy and working on, you know, green building products and projects here in the city. But, you know, we're very clumsy about how we communicate. And so what we've realized, what we've been thinking about is the fact that we have to figure out ways to bring those audiences in and identify them. I mean, many of you might have been here on Tuesday and gone to visit Dunbar High School. Dunbar is one of our flagship high schools here in the city. It has the designation of being the highest rated LEED Platinum school on the planet. It's also the home of about 653 students. And you know, they go to school there every day. Are they the targets of our green building message? Is it their families? Is it their neighbors? Or is it other school districts? Part of being able to think about those different audiences and figure out who to include and who to exclude in your communication is the big challenge. I mean, I look at this audience right now. You know, I've been to a lot of green builds, like a lot of green builds. And so this might be my 10th, I think. And you don't get a sticker for that. They don't do anything. But like, I think about my first green build in, I think it was Portland, Oregon in 2004. Way different. You know, the audience was different. The messaging to the audience was different. I mean, there were less people. There were less women. There were definitely less people that look like I do. There was less understanding of the fact that if you want to reach audiences, sometimes you have to go out and get them and bring them to your message. And that's the only way in which you can actually include them. And so as I was revisiting that and trying to assemble the amazing folks behind me, I mean, that was kind of the catalyst for having this type of conversation. You know, that, I mean, actually, if I'm honest, like, probably the first seed of this conversation started like almost like 8 years ago. I saw Sarah Cederberg over there from USGBC. Sarah and I were in Berlin, and we were working on a LEED project for a developer. And the developer, you know, it's Germany, and like, you know, everyone's like super cool and tall, and like, you're, you know, we're in an office, and there's like triple glazed windows, and they have a double facade, and like shag carpeting, and little like bowls with gummy bears, and you know, like we're there and we're getting through the whole LEED system, and we get to indoor environmental quality, and like the room goes silent. And we're like, oh, what's going on? And so the product manager says, hey, we're gonna talk in German for a little bit, just sit tight. And they start talking, and then like it gets heated, and then like I think somebody storms out of the room, and they're like, and it's like 15, 20 minutes later, and then the product manager kind of leans to us, and he's like, so you're saying there's no smoking in the building whatsoever? And we're like, oh. We'd missed that. Like, we didn't think about like how to package our message to make sure that it was something that could be received well by different audiences. And that's kind of what we're getting to today. We want to be able to understand the idea that, you know, there are people that you want to compel to act, and then there are people that you want to just inform about the action that you're taking. And so that's what we're hoping to accomplish with these folks behind me. We'll kind of get to introducing, you know, Liz and Aaron and Greg later on, but what I did is basically assemble this interdisciplinary group and kind of ask them, how can we have more impact? And what they represent really is the deconstruction of storytelling. Greg is our kind of resident, savant, big brain kind of, Greg develops the imperative. He is able to identify what's the problem that we're trying to solve. My role is one of governance. It's one of stewardship. My job is to be able to implement the solutions to the projects that Greg has identified and issues. Liz is our designer, and she's a story coach. Liz is the one that pulls the story and the narrative out of the projects that we work on. And Aaron is our closer. So Aaron is actually the one that pushes these stories out into the public, to you, to the person next to you, to the people that are not in this room who actually really need to hear this message. And so we work very tangentially and not really together, but they represent those parts of the story. And so what we've done is we've kind of bucketed some different subject topics. We hope that you'll be kind of involved. And what we kind of did is look at 3 different topics. We said environment and climate. That's one that we can talk about. Health and wellness, and policy and government. And so those are the different buckets that we're going to get to. Hopefully you'll enjoy it and participate. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at Rookler Politics. It's a media news website, a very DC but national thing, and very busy right now. And prior to that, I was at Governing, which is a state and local media outlet. I was a publisher there for about 4 years. So I'm very happy to be here today. We're very happy to get some stories going. We have some stories to tell on the panel, but of course we want them from the audience. So please think of things you want to ask. We'll turn it out to you. We don't want to just hear our voices. But before I get started, and before we pick our first point, Liz, can you, as our story coach, frame the significance of a story? What does it mean? What is it?
Sure. And for the record, I've never been called a story coach until now, but it is what we do. I mean, we spend time working with people to understand what they are trying to achieve and what they are trying to tell. And stories, I think, get underrated in the big picture because they really are. We're all wired to understand through stories. We learn, we get connected to our values, we are sometimes compelled to act, all through stories. And it's true, I'm a creative, but it's scientifically proven that a story actually activates multiple parts of your brains, whereas if you were just to deliver information, it sits in one place, so it doesn't resonate as much. So you start to realize that, especially when you look around this room and all you people that have so much impact and are doing things to really make the world a better place, that it's not just the information you're delivering it, but how you're delivering it. And I work with clients like you. I work at a creative agency, and we all focus on people that are in the social good space. So not just in Greenbuild and environment, while that's an area that I'm very inspired by, it's a broader social good. And in that, what we do is really work with them to help them craft a story and help them to understand the importance that it's not just what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. So.
Excellent. So with that in mind, we're going to let you all pick. It's the end of the day. I know you've had a lot of learning going on. So environment and climate, I feel like I'm running a game show. Environment and climate, health and wellness, and policy and government. Can we have a show of hands for environment and climate? Who'd like to start there? Okay.
That'll do it.
Oh, Greg, you got to wait for the others. Okay, health and wellness. Okay, interesting. All right. Policy and government. I think environment and climate. What do you think? Was Greg right?
Sounds good.
Okay, Greg, over to you.
All right, thank you.
Do you want me to ask a question? You're just going to
Sure.
Okay, no, I'm teasing. You go.
Okay.
There's a story you want to tell it.
So about 500 years ago, I'm starting at the beginning of the story. About 500 years ago, Galileo got the church pretty upset by saying, in fact, based on science, the earth is not really the center of the universe. And at that point, the church, which had been one of the largest sponsors of science and technical insight, veered away from science, and it's come back to science. And it's amazing to be here in DC in 2015, where the notion that we can't do anything on climate change in Congress because science is not a viable basis for policy, because what science says about climate change is optional, and the Pope has said absolutely science is right on. So we've had this reversal over 500 years where the church was against science, policy for science, and now it's policy is against science, and the church is an advocate. So my first conclusion is, given the way the response to questions about climate change are, which have risen a lot since the Pope's coming out and its statement on climate change, is it's good to have God on your side. The federal government has 430,000 federal buildings, which is almost a quad of electricity, and it's desperate. All these agencies want to do something about it, but in part because we as a nation are unable, through our political body, to use science as a basis to say, yeah, we've got this thing called climate change, we're going to put in place a cap and trade program, we're going to put in place cost to CO2. We've been unable to do anything at a national level, and so I have the good fortune of chairing a federal advisory board, which is guiding the greening of federal buildings. And so this story is about breaking down a big problem, which is how do you wrestle with climate change nationally. And what we've done is and this group, by the way, has on it the heads of real estate of all the federal agencies, as well as distinguished architects. And what we've said is we're going to adopt the social cost of carbon, which was created by a dozen federal agencies and has a high price on carbon of $40 a ton. And we're going to incorporate that into all of the energy and design decisions in buildings. And as that gets implemented, it's going to help drive federal investment in buildings to greener and greener. And so the piece of that story is, at first, as we talked about, is have God on your side. And second is break the story down, take a bite that works, get that done, and build from there.
Mark, to make it a little bit more project specific, you've been working on long-term renewable goals for the city, right? And you mentioned in our conversation that symbols played a really important role in that. Can you kind of tie what Greg is saying and explain how you've used symbols in DC to see results?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what Greg was getting at is that there's a lot of times there are bite-sized pieces or there are details. Details matter. And we have the kind of good fortune of having an amazing team here in the city and the support of our mayor, where this year, in the last several months, we were able to complete the two largest renewable power purchases ever completed in US history. The first was we purchased the output of a 46 megawatt wind farm in southwestern Pennsylvania for the next 20 years. And just a week and a half ago, our city council approved the solar power purchase agreement, which will deploy about 11.5 megawatts of solar across district rooftops. What that really means is we are effectively using our portfolio to drive the market and saying that cities can actually have an impact in terms of how they purchase their power and how they create an environment to attract others, to give advice to other cities to do the same. But most people don't care about megawatts. Like, most people have no idea how the grid works between the Atlantic Ocean and Illinois, and like no one knows any of that. And we recognize the fact that if we want to actually connect to people that are in this city, there's 600,000+ people here, and being able to actually push that to them requires symbolism and it requires details. And so what we did is there's a woman named Brittany who's awesome, and she's a third generation vixologist, which is a flag maker. Look it up. And so we got her to make it's like 10 or 12 foot DC flag, and we put it in a car, and we drove 3.5 hours, or maybe 4.5, to southwestern Pennsylvania, and took it up 300 feet to the hub of the windmill, and we flew the DC flag over top of this wind farm. Now, granted, that was pretty heavy-handed in terms of symbolism, but those photos have gone everywhere, and it's like that is now the symbol that whether it is someone who's in the green space or someone who just likes to take pride in their city, they now firmly associate the district with renewable power, and that's how you kind of start to create a story from a detail and then find out what audience is going to receive it in which way.
And Liz, you've worked with Mark on other projects, but a variety of clients across the spectrum. And I would like to put in a caveat. For the next hour, you have free consulting. If you have any questions to ask Liz about how to better tell a story for your organization, just stand behind a microphone and we'll pick you.
Oh yeah, totally.
But can you tell us a little bit about far-reaching clients, what you've seen and how they've used these stories effectively in environment and climate?
Sure. I mean, just to touch on what Mark is talking about specifically, I mean, I've heard this work that they've done. Before I started working with Mark, I didn't know really any of the details to it. So it's really interesting for me to hear the details, but also hear the passion and the core of what they're trying to achieve. And so the next level of that is, my question to you is, it went everywhere. Is it everywhere within this room, or is it everywhere beyond this room? Is it people that aren't talking about energy on a daily basis, or is it, the broader audience? Like, where are you trying to reach? And that's part of what we try to talk to. But we have a lot of experience doing this with one thing that comes to mind is our work with the Pew Charitable Trust. I don't know does anybody know who they are in this room? Yes, okay, so a couple people, and they are a large, obviously, organization in the city, and we've been doing work with them for a couple of years. And the interesting thing about their story is that they come from oil money, actually. They're from the Sun Oil, and it's a couple that had kids and continued this fund. And what we've learned is how that money has been passed down, and because of their religious upbringing, they really wanted to continue to give that money back. So they wanted to donate, but they wanted it to be anonymous, which is interesting because it's a really quiet way of giving. It's not in it to get the glory, but they really wanted to have an impact. So they do tons of work from strengthening environmental policy to protecting the ocean to sharing information about consumer, making information more accessible to consumers. And so one of the things that we've worked with them and to help spread that story is just it used to be very siloed where they'd talk about their environmental work or they'd talk about the health work, and it was these little pockets of people that knew what they were doing, but nobody else really knew beyond Pew Research Center, which you hear on NPR on a daily basis, who the Pew Charitable Trust was. And so with them, we really tried to work with holding on to that core story that they wanted to give back, they wanted to have an impact, but it wasn't about them, but also leverage that broader picture of they are doing work in the environment, they are doing work in policy, they are impacting health, and bring it. I mean, I work in the digital space, so we really help to kind of communicate that in a more unified platform and try to share things out where they all have these resources and aren't so siloed off.
Excellent. I can say on the media aspect, if you're looking to kind of find a story and convey it and get it out to a larger group, everybody has social, everybody tracks what hits or what sticks. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind, especially nowadays, is that local is really important. So anything that's at a very much a grassroots level doesn't get the coverage it needs, but it can resonate across many platforms. So getting down into the local story of whatever yours is in your organization is pretty powerful on a national level as well. So let's switch over to policy and governance. I know that's common here in DC, but there's a neat story that you all worked on together, all three of you, on Build Smart DC, correct? Yeah. Now, Greg, can you start? Did that start with, you were part of that, or?
Well, this is smart roofs?
No,
Well, I mean, it all depends. So they're not unrelated. So I think I can talk a little bit about Build Smart DC, and then we can kind of talk about how it kind of fits in. I think, so here's a big deal. All right, so we realized that we have 400 plus buildings in the city, and there's a lot of energy kind of flowing through those buildings, and there's a lot of smart meters to those buildings, and we have access, through begrudgingly, but we have access to that data. And we recognize the fact that we need to compel ourselves to action, and we need to compel everyone else to action. So we took that data, we aggregated it, and we pushed it out and wanted to make it public. So right now, you can go on to buildsmartdc.com, pull up any building in the city's portfolio, and see the energy usage yesterday, last week, 2 weeks ago, last year, both for electricity, natural gas, and also now for water. And we thought that was important because the idea was that if we're able to make that information transparent or public, then that would somehow create a level of accountability. But nobody was going to it. And so the people weren't using it internally, no one was really going to it externally. It was like people liked it and they liked the idea of it, but we realized that it was something that needed to be curated and needed to be to thought about a little bit more extensively. And so what we did is that's when we kind of went to go talk with Liz and figure out, is there a way where we can make this more digestible and make it something that is actually like worth going to and compelling to go to, even though it's like amazing, like you should really check it out. And that, I mean, that's what we brought Liz into.
And we had lots and lots of conversations. And data can be extremely powerful, and it's always a fine line between transparency and making it accessible. Like you're not trying to tell a story that isn't true, but it's also trying to make it understandable to whoever's accessing it. And so we kind of started with, who are you talking to? Which was a hard question to answer.
And I mean, also what would happen is that we would go to meet with, again, Liz and other creatives, and we would just ramble on and on and on about like how we wanted to talk to everybody about stuff. Like, oh, we want to make sure that this is available to students. We want to make sure this is available to like, to building owners and building managers, and set an example. And
we want to sound cool. We want to sound like the energy people. Like we want to have a cool voice, but we also want everybody to understand it. And
I think we were like, can we throw like some hashtags in like how we're talking about it to make it like sound like we're like more like on the cutting edge, like get the hipster vibe involved.
Yeah.
And, but ultimately we had this board on the wall that had all of these different audiences, and Liz was like, so you're going to end up exactly where you started.
Can you tell us, Greg, we'll get back to the cool roofs, green roofs in a second, but can you talk about the challenge of creating investment in energy efficiency when you were with the Clinton administration?
Sure. So, yeah, thank you, Erin. So let's be honest, energy efficiency is like the world's most boring subject, right? So as a newly minted bureaucrat in the Clinton administration, we decided this is with Art Rosenfeld, who's kind of like the father of energy efficiency, and has been a friend and mentor for a long time. We decided we were going to try and figure out how to solve the challenge of how do you get more energy efficiency financing. So we're excited about being in government. So we looked around, we said there's Fannie Mae, so we're going to create an energy efficiency national organization called FEMA, and it's going to get federal funding. And we talked to people, and they're like, well, it takes about 3-4 years to do that. And when you do that, you've got to hire a general counsel, and then you hire VP, and what they really care about is their salaries and whether they have good offices and do they have the right perks and what are their health insurance programs. It goes on and on and on. We're like, okay, well, that's not going to work. So we brought together 7 or 8 big Wall Street firms, heads of national organizations, Secretary of Energy came, and we sort of said, do we create an organization? And after talking and talking and really listening, we understood that the challenge was there's no standard for energy efficiency. How do you measure it? How do you monitor it? How do you verify it? How do you define it? What's the common language? And so we set about creating a standard called IPMVP, which is the consensus standard for measurement and verification for energy efficiency. It's the M&V basis for LEED. It's required for all federal buildings, has been translated into most major languages. And although it still remains incredibly boring, it's enabled a lot more energy efficiency financing, because now I've got energy efficiency projects that are defined the same way, using the same language with the same terms, so I can aggregate them and I can do pooled financing for those. So that was a really important experience. I think the one thing that was the sort of biggest takeaway in that process is because we had all these national organizations that felt like this was their jurisdiction. What are you doing coming into our jurisdiction? The reason the IPMVP was a success is we made about 200 people in organizations absolutely confident that they were the father, that they had direct paternal responsibility and had inseminated this particular project and could claim credit. And we got 2 or 3 different energy secretaries to write letters, which I wrote, and it was auto pen signed, so the secretary never even saw the thing, that they would put up on their wall saying, thank you, Fred, for your extraordinary insights and contribution to creating this. So I think the lesson there is if you can make a lot of people feel like it's their thing that they own, that they're directly responsible for, you're guaranteed a success, which is probably why Mormon marriages work, but anyway.
I mean, just to add to what Greg is saying, is that you can't underestimate or undervalue how important it is to have key buy-in from key people, and that is often driven by pride and kind of like hubris. But we actually went through a very large process with the city starting in 2011 through now. Many of you are probably familiar with the Sustainable DC plan that the city kind of launched. I mean, we had over 8,000 meetings across all different spectrums of the notion of defining and designing a sustainable future for the city over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. And it was an exhaustive effort, but what was the catalyst for that was our former mayor decided to kind of hitch his wagon to sustainability. And I'll be honest, like I am pretty sure that it was like more of on a whim than it was on like, you know, this is like absolutely where I want to bury my legacy. But that's exactly what happened. I mean, once he kind of just made a little bit of a push forward, it just snowballed into something that enveloped the entire city. And then it became everything, that was front page of everything that he did. And it almost set a tone for, now we have a new administration with a new mayor that has new visions for the city, but has adopted that sustainable DC plan and also encouraged and basically emboldened us to take it even further. And so I think the ability to kind of find out what's that sweet spot and who are the critical path people to getting that story out there is crucial. And sometimes you have to just like make them feel like that was that was their baby and their idea.
Liz, what do you think, especially as it relates to policy and governments in those projects, what's the challenge in people finding their own story or recognizing what it is and connecting it to an audience?
The challenge. Well, I mean, I think what he's getting at is really owning that, understanding the experience and connecting to a story, which is obviously a really important part to being able to tell the story. And that's always a hard thing. It's oftentimes like you get into the weeds of like when you talk about energy efficiency, like you get into the super detailed level of what you're trying to accomplish that it's easy to like lose the bigger story arc.
Sounds like Charlie Brown, like teacher.
Yeah, like I'm like acronyms. And that's part of, I think that is the challenge. It's helping them to figure out what is the problem. I mean, a compelling story has a clear beginning, a climax, and an end. A denouement, if you will. And I think being able to find what that challenge is and what the solution is and being able to share that with people is what ultimately is what allows others to connect and oftentimes when people connect to a story, they take it on as their own, and that's the crazy thing. Like that's what was happening there. They hear a story and it's something that resonates with them, and you'll go a couple months and you'll hear them telling the story as if it was something that happened to them. And that's what you want. You want people to connect. You want them to feel it in a way that they care about it.
Greg, did you see your new standard that you developed sort of take flight and catch on, and how did that happen?
I think it happened because everybody struggles with financing, and the financial institutions said, you need to standardize. We want every single energy efficiency contract to have the same language, meaning the same thing, with the same terms and same structure. So and that was an extraordinarily powerful motivation.
Mm-hmm. How did you and Mark how did you two get connected?
Oh gosh.
So I'm a barber, and
I was also like I was warned not to tell the story of my beard growth that involves the Appalachian Trail, and no one was like, do not talk about that at all today. Although if you want to talk about it afterwards, I'm more than happy to. But no, I mean basically it was very similar to what we've been talking about, is the idea that we kind of confronted the idea that governments do not have to act in silos, and that if we basically adopt different principles that the private sector has already done, I mean, power purchase agreements are not like a new thing. Like if you look at all the, Fortune 100 companies and all the folks that are committed to a component of the ethos of their companies, whether it's Apple or whether it's, these larger entities that involves renewable kind of energy or sustainability or like social good, then you can mimic what they're doing. The issue is that government does not always, it gets in its own way and does not realize that when you're in DC, a place that has a deregulated energy market, you have the ability to actually go out to the market and say, this is exactly what I would like to have, can you please give that to me? And that had never been done before. And if you look at adopting it over a long time horizon, you start to get into the field where we're not just making these deals because they're a good idea. They're saving us a ton of money. And so like it's just a matter of looking at life cycle investments and looking at it from the point of view of a lot of private sector entities that are being successful in this. And also, to be honest, it's like, I look at like energy kind of like suppliers the way I look at like airlines. Like there was a point in time when it was like really kind of like it should have been like super expensive and it was really like like an elite thing to do. But it's like your time is over. It's like so now it's time to be able to look at the kind of like crowdsourcing of demand and get to a place where we are pushing a lot of like energy suppliers to actually deliver exactly what we want, and that may end up being microgrid development, may end up being decentralized kind of power generation. Any of those things are available if you ask for it. So that's kind of where we kind of like cross paths with Greg, because it's like Greg helps us to know what we needed to ask for and how do we actually defend that this will be successful going forward.
Before we move on to the health and wellness, if anybody has questions throughout, we're very casual, as you can see. Feel free you can raise your hand, just walk over the microphone and we'll bring you the conversation. Good stopping point.
Yeah.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
Uh-oh.
Is that mic on?
Speak loudly.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you guys for the invitation. I appreciate that. My name is Gisela Garrett. I'm a communications director at an architecture firm, so I'm in-house. And this is maybe most relevant for Liz, although I'd love to hear from any of you. I am jazzed to hear that the last DC mayor got his wagon hitched on sustainability. But I think maybe something architects, maybe even in this room, deal with is that we sometimes get hitched onto topics that we're not as jazzed about. And I'm wondering if you guys maybe could share a little insight on how to redirect either your messaging or the perception in the marketplace to sort of get back on track when one string does take off.
Mark is actually a recovering architect.
Recovering, yeah. I mean, I am a licensed architect, and I talk about it like it's like in rehab.
Not to steal Liz's thunder.
Yeah,
No, Greg.
yeah. But no, I mean, I think the skill set is problem solving. It's three-dimensional problem solving, and a lot of that really ends up being can you. But here's the thing. I guess architects are clearly undervalued. Everyone knows that. It's like so the idea is, can you bring your client to where you need to be with or without their knowledge? And I think that is the key thing. It's like, when you make everything a decision-making component, it puts it up on the auction block. And I think that sustainable development and sustainable design often, the lion's share of it happens as a matter of course, and it should just be incorporated as opposed to offering it as an add-on.
Anything you want to add, Liz?
I don't know where I would add to that. I think what I would ask you is, in terms of pulling them to a different, off course, who is it that's pulling it off, and is there like a clear goal that you're trying to accomplish that it's not getting at? Because I think it's different than, I relate it to what I do. Like, oftentimes I work with clients that I'm not as passionate about the thing and I don't have a personal connection to, but I usually find some way to, if it's something that is contributing for my organization, contributing to the greater good, or something that I think really does have an impact, I find a way to connect with it. But if it's something that's totally off course, then that's when it's a different story, and that's when, I think it's 3D problem solving. How do you bring them around to...
Yeah, and just put it, just stuff a lot of stuff in there, like put it in ahead of time, and then like redirect their attention everywhere else.
I don't know about that. It's not sounded like...
Yes, it is. Like, this is shiny.
Effective.
Hi, my name's Brandy. I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I don't know how many Canadians are in the room, but energy efficiency is also not sexy in Canada. Neither is government until just recently. We got a new prime minister. I was pretty pumped about that.
Welcome.
So I just wanted to, we're really good at celebrating brand new projects, like new buildings with like ribbon cuttings and plaques on the wall and things like that. And conversations usually are really bubbly around new projects, but we have a lot of work on retrofitting side of life. And so I just wanted to get your guys' stories about how you've been able to celebrate some of your existing buildings and how to get that into the conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, I mean, we have a pretty robust like retro commissioning program throughout our portfolio of buildings, but no one knows about it. And so I'd love to be able to tell you that we've developed a way forward. We were thinking about kind of rolling out a kiosk program that lets people kind of interface with that, but I found that people don't want to stop at kiosks, you know, and so it's like the perfume people in the mall, if people still went to malls. And so it ends up being something where we don't know. We don't know how to show the fact that we are now investing significant dollars in new control systems, significant dollars in remote access so that we can have temperature settings that actually mirror the occupancy of the buildings. Those are components that I think it would be great to be able to talk about so that we can get more investment, but I'm at a loss right now as to how to really kind of push that forward in a substantive way. Sorry.
Well, I think the LEED plaque is really pretty helpful. Because if I'm taking a property and I'm repositioning it as healthy and green as opposed to just sort of putting marble in, that's a more complicated story. But I think, you know, there's a great American philosopher named Pogo who once said, if it exists, it must be possible. And we've really crossed a point now where for a retrofit building, and certainly for a new building, for a retrofit, you've really got two choices. You have a conventional building designed to barely meet code. You have a building that's designed with the intent of being efficient and healthy. And I think people are aware enough and experienced enough with it that differentiation really kind of jumps out. So CoStar now, just for the last year, has been listing Energy Star rating and LEED rating on the properties that it leases, most of which have been rehabbed. And so I think the ability to take a well-known standard like Energy Star and LEED and differentiate it around health in particular, which has been grossly overlooked as a driver, very hard to quantify. It's been great work in quantification of health that's going on now. I think that's probably the piece where it jumps out. So if you're going to do energy efficiency, you're going to be upgrading a building's energy systems. You probably get better airflow. You got probably better air quality. You get lower CO2. You're probably putting in better quality filters like HEPA filters. You probably get more, and so you're really talking about improving the health of that building. That's probably where I would focus in terms of differentiation.
Well, you gave us a nice segue into our health and wellness section, so thank you, and thank you. You and Mark worked together on the cool roofs and green roofs, but why don't you start it off and tell us about the challenge, explain what it was. We can move into kind of the story and how the impact.
So to Mark's point about data, we're working on a project with DGS and also with a national organization that does low income. DC has, I think, really become one of the urban leaders on sustainability in so many ways. And like other cities, it has pilot programs for green roofs, pilot programs for cool, pilot programs for PV, which are fairly substantial. But it's very hard to say what are the full costs and benefits, how does this impact health? And it's very hard or impossible to say, well, I want to roll this out across the city, which of these do I do, and in what order, and what are the benefits? So the project that we're doing for and with Mark and his group and with a New York low-income organization is to try and map that in detail. So if you think about DC, you've got a bunch of hospitals, people who don't have health insurance, they don't feel well, they go to the hospital and they get treated, and they don't have health insurance, so it's not reimbursed. Well, somebody pays for that. The city pays for it. But there's no way to connect those excess health costs into policy design decisions. So what we're doing is we're mapping full costs and benefits. Keith Glassbrook, who's right here, has been leading the modeling. You talked to him about it afterwards. And we're able to say these are real costs. We're working with epidemiologists. We've built a very detailed financial model that actually is able to quantify a lot of these benefits in a way that gives you a net present value dollar number. So just looking at the several hundred city buildings, the value creation for the city of doing a combination of green, cool, and PV is over $300 million. At a citywide level, it's several billion dollars, and you can begin to fundamentally affect air quality. You can even change the temperature slightly in a city potentially up to 2 degrees as you deploy this at scale. And if you take a sort of step back and say cost benefit of green buildings, it's maybe a 10-to-1 ratio. Half of those benefits don't accrue to the building owner or the occupant. They accrue to the people around it. They accrue to the larger city. So we're really trying to drive quantification using the data that DC's made available to say what are those numbers in what buckets, and how can that be then used at a city level to drive policy that has a very large impact. And I will just say, if you're with any city and are interested in this, please come to talk to Keith or I, because we'd love for this to be adopted nationally. One city and then the low income we're doing in multiple cities is not enough to drive this new paradigm, which is cut across the buckets, understand the full set of costs and benefits, including all the health benefits, and then make a rational decision for all roofs and all surfaces through policy requirements and through incentives.
Now, was this the project we were speaking before that was transformative because you were able to empower people that were already behind it, or am I confusing all these examples?
It's a different one.
Go ahead. Tell that one too, though, because I think that was, can you tell that story too?
What again?
Never mind.
Let me jump in, because I think part of the context also for what we have called our Smart Roof program is that we decided that we want to be a catalyst for decision making, and we wanted to display leadership within our city and to other cities. And so looking across our entire portfolio of buildings, we said, here's 250 acres of rooftop space. How do we prioritize and say what exactly do we want to do with each one of those? And that was kind of the beginning on the government side of saying that we know this will ultimately lead down a path of improving the wellness of the citizens of the district, but can we use the assets we have as an example and as a catalyst for more action?
Can you talk a little bit about the irresistible staircases? It's a good story, but how you were able to bring that into play.
Well, so it's all right. So irresistible staircases, and I guess, and I haven't really explained this to Aaron. It's more of it's my Everest. It's it's not. So here's the notion. The notion is that this is what we use in our office, and it's we keep coming to this idea that there's got to be a way to compel people to act. Part of my team also deals with waste management, so we deal with all the recycling, composting, kind of trash removal from all the city's buildings, and I mean, USGBC and the Convention Center are doing a great job of separation here. But compelling someone when you give them a decision to be made over 2 to 3 inches to make the right decision is very hard. People will walk up to a container and make the absolute wrong decision. If you've put that in clear kind of language, English, Spanish, you've put pictures, it does not matter. People do whatever they want to do. So we talk about irresistible staircases because if we can create a staircase that is compelling enough where it will captivate and demand your attention, then we believe that you will use it. We have a building here that is our consolidated forensics lab, and that was kind of one of the guiding principles of this staircase. This is the building where it's our morgue and our forensic officers. It's our CSI kind of lab where all of the crimes are solved. And if there's a zombie apocalypse, this is where all the bodies will go. And there's a staircase in that building that is designed to foster collaboration. And so it's amazingly designed, and it's delicately hanging in this large atrium. But what it starts to do and what it starts to get to the idea is that if we can compel people to change their behavior based on physical items that are beautiful, then we're going to start to succeed. Now, so it doesn't just apply to actual design and development. It applies to concepts and ideas. Can you make something that is irresistible for people because you've already determined and it's objective that it's in their own best interest? And compelling them to do that and compelling them to make the right decision so that they're walking up to a bin and they know that there's 3 options, they will make that right decision because you've made it impossible for them to make the wrong decision.
So just to jump on that,
yeah.
One, I've been thinking about what staircase would I really want to climb up. And I'm picturing, but I think there's 2 pieces of it. One is making it attractive for somebody to climb up, or making it, you talk about the signage over the trash cans, and I think to bring the storytelling piece into it, it's for kids that don't know, it's having a clear sign isn't telling them why they should recycle or what is the actual impact, or relating it to something of, if you don't put this in compost, then this is what, and that's the piece of getting the story. And I think, how it's designed and all of that matters, of course, but it's that why piece of it, which is an interesting thing to kind of factor into both the staircase and signage at schools and helping kids to understand.
And because kids are also they're very tricky, and so it's hard to kind of figure out what to do with them. Another kind of, you just made me think of this, is that we started a large food waste program throughout our schools, and we first started out with 11 schools. Then as we've progressed over the last year, we've upped it to where there's about 60, 70 schools within our portfolio. They actually have food waste kind of collection, and that's to meet a legislated goal of waste diversion, which is about 45%. And we were starting to move towards that goal and feeling pretty good about ourselves. But what happens, and I would go to these cafeterias in schools, and I would watch, and I would see kids would go get their lunch, and they would take it and sit down, and they would not eat it, and then they would get up, and they would dump the entire tray in the trash. And so, when we were starting to get these diversions from landfill that were meeting our goals, it wasn't a real metric, because it was a metric that was skewed because of the fact that we were having, there was more food being wasted because they weren't eating it, and so I think it's hard to not just understand what is the policy framework for it, but it's also important to actually see the ramifications of your policy and see if they're having a true impact on the wellness of those people that are your clients.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Are there any questions regarding health and wellness in this area? There is one thing I wanted to have Liz talk a little bit more, though, about was the emotion piece. Health and wellness is something that relates to everybody, and I think it's sometimes missed in the projects and that connection.
Yeah, I think that what I was just talking about really touches on it, that what people do relate to is that a personal connection. So, and health and wellness is something that I think is really easily relatable. All it takes is one story of something that makes anybody, kids and adults alike, it really is timeless in terms of connecting to that human story. And so, everybody relates to cancer at this point. Everybody relates to obesity. Everybody relates to, you name it. And I think that's the piece, finding the actual core of the story, why it does matter. It's not that you're trying to, have a certain diversion rate. This diversion rate is actually helping to improve health and wellness because of X, Y, and Z. And finding that story that does actually allow you to connect to that.
Mark, have you been able to do that in DC at all with transit and transportation? Have you been able to make that connection?
We're getting there. I think that those of you that are from DC know that DC is it's been growing. It's a city, and it's also evolving in terms of how people actually move throughout the city. We've been looking at our buildings as part of a network as opposed to just individual buildings. And what's been happening that I think is most interesting is the complete kind of explosion of bike transit that's happened throughout the city. And it's noticeable from our partners at the Department of Transportation that have kind of repaved a large amount of the city with bike lanes, and as well as deploying our bike share program. But there's been I think bike travel is probably somewhere like 3 or 4% of commuting. That's 15,000 people that are on the streets every day on bicycles. But it's not ubiquitous. It's not that bicycle transit is not happening everywhere. And so what we're starting to do is actually look at almost kind of trip heat mapping, basically to see where are all the people actually moving on the bikes and why is it that people that can most benefit from multimodal transit are not taking advantage of it, and then maybe can we do something about that. We're working now on potentially doing a large campaign, kind of an arts campaign around bike transit in areas that will promote that, and we'll put more bike fix stations out there. So if you have a problem with your bike, you can fix it, and that's where we're starting to look at solutions that speak to our question. And our question is why are some people compelled to go in two wheels versus not?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
I just want to make a comment on this data thing. DC's been doing such a great job. So Used to be if you want to get a bus, you're like, okay, the bus usually comes at like 3:10. Someone to go out and wait and wait and wait. And now there's an app that someone created because of the data that DC got out there that sends you a text or one email or whatever, 75 seconds before that the bus is going to be there, this exact bus. And you set it for 75 seconds because it takes you, 30 seconds to pat your dog and 10 seconds to shut the refrigerator, and 5 seconds to get your keys, and 20 seconds down the flight of stairs, and 10 seconds, and the bus comes 10 seconds later. So there's a sense of control with the bike stuff, which I absolutely love. There's an app that says, okay, what's the closest bike to you? Also, I need to put that bike somewhere else in one of 350 other drop-off points around the city, and it will tell me, are there slots available to drop my bike in? So the uncertainty of going someplace and not being able to park your bike, which is incredibly frustrating, goes away with this app. And this is DC pushing out data, being very creative, encouraging people to create apps. So in these two examples, public transit, probably two of the biggest obstacles to public transit, which is I don't want to wait for public transit, and I don't want to be stuck with my bike so I'm late for a meeting because I have no place to get solved, because you take that data, you make it publicly available in a way that's super user-friendly. It's been great.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting ready to close out the session. We've got a few minutes left. I wanted to give you a chance for closing comments. What do you want to impart on the group before you leave around this topic? Mark, we'll start with you.
Start with me? Okay. And this is not the time to talk about the Appalachian Trail trip? No? Okay. Got it. I think that we run the risk always of trying to do everything at once and trying to design ourselves into a place where we see the end game and that we're just trying to get that path there. And what I've found and what I'm learning in terms of working like in government and being a steward of the citizens of the district is that a lot of times that path there is extremely fuzzy, and that's okay. And I think that, so when we're starting to look at these vignettes and starting to look at these pods of information, it's all right to let them kind of grow on their own. And it's all right to not just think about, I want this to be a better place, because we don't know what better is. All we know is the fact that we want to make this operate more efficiently, or we want to give people access to options. And I think letting those be the guiding principles and then pulling the stories out of providing that to people and getting it to a granular level where we can say, this particular person had this opportunity as a result of the type of work we did, and that is contributing to this large conversation about kind of the greening of our city and our experience here in this country and elsewhere is compelling enough. And we should almost focus on being able to capture those moments and like the zeitgeist of that experience.
Greg?
Yeah, I guess I have two contradictory thoughts. One is, I think it's good to frame stuff as large as possible. So DC under sort of expected climate change is 10 times as many 95-degree days. I mean, functionally, the city is prospectively kind of unlivable for much of the summer. It was built on a swamp, and so that's really depressing, right? But so that's the large, because you want to sort of tell a large picture. Why is what you're doing really matter, and why is it consequential to everybody, and how does that change the environment you're living in? On the other hand, you don't want it to disempower people, and so with my kids in the school are in, which is a green school, we put money into a 3% yield bond, so there's PV on the roofs of their school, so the kids have a sense that they're participating in something that's sort of positive. There's a story that is a story of adults taking responsibility in ways that they see, that they can be proud of, so they hear the scary stuff about climate change, but they also know that there are things that can be done. I only realized this because I overheard one of my kids who didn't think I was listening saying, oh yeah, it's really cool. We've got this, we've got PV shingles on the roof and Dad drives an electric car. It's kind of cool. I'm like, yeah, baby. So the combination of sort of how does this fit into a big picture and yet not be depressing, make it personal so there's a piece there that works for the individual so you can say, I mean, my guess is if you run a survey and you say to people, climate change is accelerating, China's building coal plants, do you believe in climate change? 55% of people would say yes. But if you preface that question by saying renewables are exploding, green buildings are exploding, the rate of renewables has increased 50% in the last 2 years, there's carbon neutral cement being developed. Do you believe in climate change? The number would go from 55 to 65% because we're emotionally challenged to acknowledge the existence of something much larger and more terrifying than ourselves where there's no solution. So if you preface the question to climate change with something that empowers people and gives them confidence and hope, they're more able to emotionally accept it. So it's, I think, these two things, what's the big picture, but how do you make it sure for the individual there's a positive story so they feel empowered?
Absolutely. Liz.
I thought it was going to be nerve-wracking getting up here, but what's really stressful is the big red clock counting down in front of me. I'm gonna keep it succinct. I think keep telling stories overall, and I think that personal piece and not being afraid to connect to why you're doing what you do. Everybody in here is doing really impressive things, but simplifying it and getting it to a place that even though the work you're doing is complex, even though it can be very scientific, even though it can be, a whole range of things, really simplifying it in a way that is connecting to a more focused audience, I think is what I would end with.
Thank you all. Thank you for your attention and your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Erin. Good job.